Yeah, we're about to go live. I'll let you know when. It's fetching the video stream. It's live.
Good evening and welcome back for another COVID-19 Conversations in the Black and Brown Community. This is session 10, where we're going to focus on voting during a pandemic. As usual, the co-moderators for the show are Dr. Maya Williams and myself, Dr. Allison Myers. As you know, COVID cases in the United States have continued to rise. At this point, we have over 6 million cases in the United States alone, and we've just crossed the mark of over 200,000 deaths. Thankfully, more people have recovered, for about 4.1 million to be exact. And our folks are being hit the hardest. Black, Latino, and Native Americans have disproportional numbers of COVID-19, and we're especially getting hit hardest in the South and the Midwest. And if we had died of COVID-19, if white patients had died with COVID-19 at the same rate, if the same actual rate of white Americans died of COVID-19, we would have lost 18,000 Blacks, 6,000 Latinos, 600 Indigenous persons, and 70 Pacific Islanders would still be alive. And of course, this is going to affect how we go to the polls in terms of voting. And also what's been going on in terms of structural racism with the cases of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others that we've unfortunately tragically lost at the hands of law enforcement. And of course, we all know that voting has been disenfranchised in communities of color. If we think back to 2012, when Obama was running, there were instances in the South where people were being told that they had special days to vote, which were actually days after the real election. And if we look at what Americans are saying about how all of this is going to impact voting and their thoughts on how this will disrupt the election, we can see that most people actually feel that it's likely or somewhat likely that COVID-19 may impact the results of the election. And this is most commonly found in people who are voting Democrat. Why is all this happening? Well, we know that there's disparities in voting. If we think historically, Blacks were not allowed to vote in this country for a very long time. It wasn't until the late 1800s that Black men could vote, and Black women were not able to vote until well into the 1900s. And it turns out that also our people, because we're disproportionately convicted of felonies, that also holds us back from voting. We've seen that in places like Florida, people with felony convictions, if they have not paid their fines to the state, they are not able to vote in the upcoming election. In addition, there have been issues with having IDs, which can also further prevent people from voting, and longer wait times in communities of color. I know personally, when I was living in the South Side of Chicago, I waited in line 4 hours to vote when President Barack Obama was running for his first election. And it's also found in Latino communities that people have to wait longer to vote. So what are things that are being done? Tomorrow, BET, the National Urban League, have put together National Black Voter Day, in which they're asking that all of us reclaim our vote by, if we have not already, registering to vote, check your local voting options, know your candidates and the issues, and that goes well beyond just the president, know where you are supposed to vote, and of course, vote. We would just like to say thank you to the Tau Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated for co-sponsoring this discussion, as well as to Dr. Naomi Maria, Ms. Tiffany Harvin, the Department of Medicine, the Chayor, and our Day One audience members. Please feel free to follow us on Twitter at Minority Health 3 or on Instagram, minorityhealth.combos. So today we have a great show. Our lineup includes City Councilwoman member Adrienne Adams. She represents Southeast Queens. She grew up in Hollis, Queens native. She received her bachelor's from the Spelman Institute. And in 2017, she became the first woman on the council to represent District 28, which is Southeast Queens, including Rochdale, Jamaica, South Ozone Park, and Richmond Hill. She's very active in her community, involved with local organizations such as the NAACP, the National Action Network, and none other than the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. We also have State Senator Kevin Parker, who represents the 21st District in Brooklyn. He has been a part of the New York State Senate since 2005, where he's currently the 5th ranking Democrat. He was also appointed Majority Whip and the chair of the Senate Committee on Energy and Telecommunications. He received his bachelor's from Penn State and master's from the New School, and is currently working on his doctorate in political science at the Grad Center at the City University of New York. We look forward to having a wonderful conversation with both our state senator and city councilwoman. I will now turn it over to Maya.
Thank you, Dr. Myers. So I will start off by saying we were having this conversation a little earlier, and Dr. Myers was saying that I am an immigrant and I am very confused by the American voting system and election process. And I know that many other Americans and immigrants like myself feel the same way. So we'll start off the discussion by just asking a few questions on when is the deadline for registering to vote in NYC? When is the deadline to receive an absentee ballot if you are an NYC resident but currently residing somewhere else like St. Lucia? And when is the deadline to request a mail-in ballot in NYC?
Okay, I guess I'll go ahead and start. First of all, thank you so much, Dr. Myers, and thank you, Maya. Thank you also to Tau Omega and my sisters of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority for hosting us tonight. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight. Maya, I absolutely concur. Voting in the US has turned out to be, such a nightmare. But, the good news is that we are still voting. As a people, we are still coming together, realizing that our vote is our voice and how important and critical it is for us, especially as a people of color in this country, to continue this great tradition of voting. It wasn't easy for us to get the right to do it, but it is imperative that we continue to use our right and exercise this political muscle as often as we possibly can, and every opportunity to vote, we need to go ahead and do just that. So that said, the deadline to register to vote in New York City is October 9th. So there's still some time to do that and get it done. We are able to get an absentee ballot if you're a New York City resident currently residing somewhere else. You have the opportunity to apply online. Postmark, email, or fax, a completed application or letter request for the general election absentee ballot, no later than 7 days. That would be October 27th, 7 days before the November 3rd election. You can also apply in person up to the day before election day. So that would be, of course, November 2nd, 2020. You can file an application at any time before those deadlines, but the ballots will be mailed out beginning on or about September 18th. So we're looking at, moving ahead with, with our mail-in, absentee, everything that Donald Trump wants to call it in between when you're not in person, but he can do it and everybody else can't. So let's just make sure that we are, a part of that number always to get the job done. Hi, Senator Parker. Always glad to be in your company, sir. So, Maya, I'll let you go ahead.
Dr. Williams, you're on mute, as are you, State Senator Parker.
Thank you, Dr. Myers.
Yeah, I knew that. I was just testing you guys. Good job.
Okay. So according to NYC Votes, only 1.3% of registered voters in New York used early voting in 2019. Can you explain how early voting works and what is the deadline for this?
Yeah, I guess I'll take that first. Thank you for having me, and thank you, Alpha Kappa Alpha, for inviting me. And of course, Madam Leader, Adrienne, good to see you. Wish it was in person, but we are kind of are where we are at this point. But good to see you guys here. And this is an important conversation, right? Because voting is actually literally the cornerstone of American democracy. And that's why it's contested so much, particularly here in New York. So people should kind of understand there's 3 ways to vote. people can vote by mail, and you can apply for a ballot right now. You can just go on the website for the Department of the Board of Elections and request a ballot. And then there's in-person voting, which is October 24th to November 1st, right? Is in-person early vote, right? And then obviously election day is November 3rd. And so early vote is actually fairly new. So this is really on our second year, and maybe only like our third election that we've actually had early vote. And so people are really like, the culture of early voting hasn't been inculcated into our community, much. So we're still kind of learning how it works and getting people kind of engaged in voting early. And hopefully some of the horror stories you've been hearing about and living about 3 hours and 4 hour lines will be eliminated because of access to early vote. And so actually in the June election, I voted early for the first time. I usually vote obviously on election day, but I voted early in the last election, in part to kind of drum up people in my community to vote early. And so we encourage people to vote early and encourage people to make sure they use their franchise. I don't know if I answered your question.
You did.
Okay, good.
If I can just chime in on the early voting, and it's really glad to hear, Senator Parker, that you voted early. This is my absolute favorite way to vote. Got hooked on it the first go round last year, and got hooked on it ever since. It is the fastest, easiest. That 1 week lead time makes it almost like the emptiest, because there are few people, because the
Right.
times are staggered and all those good things. So I am a tremendous fan of early voting. I don't think that I'm ever going to go back to any other type of voting besides early voting. So I'm going to do another little sidebar commercial for that as well. Everybody, early vote. It's the way to get it done in person.
Right.
Thank you. So just to talk about our favorite president of all time, President Trump recently suggested that people use a mail-in ballot and vote in person. He stated, so let them stand in it. He stated, so let them send it in and let them go vote. And if the system is as good as they say it is, then obviously they won't be able to vote. If this isn't tabulated, then they will be able to vote. Can we vote in person to validate our mail-in ballots?
No. So first of all, voting twice is a felony. And so nobody wants to commit a felony, and nobody wants to be in violation of the law. And so you should do one of the three ways that you can vote. You don't need to do all three. So either mail in your ballot, early vote, which is Adrian's favorite way to vote, or vote on election day. But you only need to do one.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
I concur. Let's be very, very careful about getting advice from the person who resides at, where he resides in subsidized housing in Washington. Just be very careful about the advice that we accept from him. Just saying.
Right.
Thank you. And Senator Parker mentioned the fact about felonies, and we know that many Black Americans, African Americans, unfortunately have felonies, sometimes for just having a bag of marijuana. That's not even an issue right now. And Black people face many hurdles when it comes to, voting in the election. They face barriers in many places to register and to vote, staying on the voter rolls, and having the mail-in ballot counted. What steps can we as Black voters take now to ensure that our vote can be counted? And what are local governments in New York and around the United States doing to reduce these barriers?
Mm-hmm. Well, if I may, there's a number of different things that you touched on. The first of which is that people who have been convicted of felonies aren't eligible to vote. However, you can apply if you've served your time and have come out of serving time. You can apply for a certificate of relief that will allow you to vote. And so people can go down to the court and apply for the certificate of relief. And if you contact, your elected officials, they certainly know about it. If you're somebody who's been involved in the legal system, you have an attorney knows how to file it. But it's a one-page form. It doesn't take long to file. You go for it in front of a judge, and typically they're granted. But you can get a certificate of relief that will allow you to vote if you're somebody who's had, if you served any time or if you've had a felony. Now, there are some attempts to allow people persons in prison to vote. And actually, I carry a bill in the Senate that would allow people who are in prison to vote. And unfortunately, I just cannot think of the bill number off the top of my head. But I do have a bill, and it's something that we've been kicking around and trying to figure out how to get it passed. I don't see a reason why you should give up your franchise because you've made a mistake. You're already paying with time or whatever your sentence is in the context of what the judge gives you. And so, I don't understand why you have to give up your right to vote. And so that's a bill that we have out there to do that. And so just FYI, in the state of New York, we have been trying to work through the idea of making adult use cannabis legal in the state of New York. If and when that happens, part of that will be an expungement of people's records as relates to marijuana arrests. We have already decriminalized small amounts of marijuana in the state as well. And so some of those things have been historically a problem, will not be a problem going forward, in part because we're no longer prosecuting people for small amounts of marijuana. And like I said, I expect that in the next year or so that we will get to a bill that we're able to pass in the state of New York that legalizes adult use cannabis and simultaneously creates an expungement process for people who've had past convictions around marijuana. And so those are some of the ways that we're trying to reduce or eliminate the barriers in terms of access to the franchise. The other thing I just want to also note is that we just passed a bill to allow and it got signed into law to create automatic voter registration, right? This is automatic voter registration. And so this is under this new law, New Yorkers will be electronically eligible to register at DMV locations and other state agencies, right? Unless they decide to opt out. But essentially every agency will be able to register you to vote. And so we, again, are trying to increase access to the franchise here in the state of New York.
Okay, thank you. And I believe Dr. Myers said that the bill is S68.21. I think I said it correctly.
Yes.
Okay, so going back a little bit more on, Black people are consistently discriminated against. Our communities are consistently impacted against. The 15th Amendment was passed February 26, 1869, and ratified February 3rd, 1870. It states that people could not be restricted to vote based on race, creed, or past virtitude. Interestingly enough, it was not until 1965 that there was a Voting Rights Act which allowed for Blacks to have greater access to voting. How has this impacted our communities, and what are some of the more modern forms of voter suppression?
Well, we've had voter suppression, since forever in this country. Our history is embedded with voter suppression. We can start with how many bubbles are in a bar of soap, how many jelly beans in a jar, all kinds of crazy stuff like that, that our ancestors had to put up with back in the day, as they say. The more modern ways that we've seen over the past few years still has to do with, exactly what the senator just said. And we're talking about, felons and the like. We're also talking about gerrymandering, redistricting our areas, and the way that our areas are chopped up. It doesn't really make a lot of sense, but we all know that it is usually not the Democrats that come out on the winning end, of that stick when it comes to gerrymandering and redistricting areas across the country. Also, we can take a look at Stricter voting ID laws. I mean, some really, really crazy things have gone on with all of the work. We're all familiar with Stacey Abrams, I'm sure, and her work that she's done, you know, in relation to voter ID and suppression around voter ID laws. I'm looking at something that says North Carolina tried to suppress voting by bringing in a stricter voter ID law, which was overturned in the courts. The law tended to affect poor, elderly Black voters because they're less likely to have government issued IDs, like a driver's license. There are a lot of our elders that don't have a need for a driver's license. And guess what? In North Carolina, they were trying to pull back the vote for our elders because of a lack of a driver's license, something that simple. So it's estimated that up to 10% of Americans don't have adequate ID to vote under rules that require ID. In Alabama, who has a voter ID law, this is seen mainly to affect the 25% of the electorate who are Black. So take a look at Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, where Trump won by almost 23,000 votes, 200,000 people were prevented from voting due to voter ID laws. So those are just some ways. We're looking also at purging of the voting registry across the country. Ohio recently passed a law removing people from the voting register if they hadn't voted for 2 years. So we're talking about purging the voter rolls in some states. So again, the argument for the law was again to reduce voter fraud, which we all know, if we've got a brain in our heads, doesn't really exist in America. Right. So we have to take a good look at all of these things. All of these are attempts, you know, by Trump and the Republicans, you know, to hinder the Black vote and the vote of citizens of color in the country.
Thank you. And Councilmember Adams, you spoke briefly about the elderly, and I have a question reference that particular population that was disproportionately affected by COVID-19. In April, a poll in April said that 60% of voters 50 and older said that they were concerned about COVID-19 affecting voter turnout. For elderly Americans or for elderly people, voting is usually in the blood. That's what they grow up on. It's a generational thing that they would like to pass down from generation to generation. But a lot of them are scared to go outside because of COVID-19. What are the various ways that the elderly can vote during the pandemic, and what can we do as their family members to ensure that their vote is being counted?
That's a great question, you know, and I take it personally because my mother's been a poll worker for many years in South Carolina. My mother's 82 years old, you know, and loves being a poll worker. So there are a number of things that I think we need to consider when it comes to our elderly voters. We need to, first of all, make sure that I still contend that the best way to vote is to vote in person, okay? So there are several ways and precautionary measures that our elderly citizens, who, as you say, have that voting in their blood. This is what they were raised on. This is the right, and this is the way I was raised too, by the way. So I would encourage our elderly to make sure that they have the proper PPE. They have, even though all of this is already in our polling stations, I've seen it. We've got our distancing in place in our polling stations. Mm-hmm. We have our hand sanitizers there. I would even venture to say that if PPE is missing, there would be somebody with an extra mask in their bag to pull it out and some gloves to pull out to give to anybody in need. So I can encourage our elderly citizens to please mask up, glove up, hand sanitize up, and vote in person. And if at all possible, vote early. That's number one. The second option in line, of course, would be your mail-in ballots. Do that in a timely fashion. Make sure that your signatures are in place so that there's no question whether or not your vote is counted. If your vote is received in the amount of time that is required, your vote must and will count.
Thank you. Senator Parker, do you have anything to add?
No, that was a perfect answer. So I ditto.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thank you. And I still have this question for Councilmember Adams, since she mentioned poll workers. So the New York City Board of Elections is facing a shortage of poll workers, as traditionally 55% of poll workers are over the age of 55, as you alluded to earlier. How is that need being addressed, and how can someone become a poll worker?
Poll workers are needed so bad, especially we're about to enter into the most vital election of our lifetime for a lot of us. Poll workers, it's really easy to do that. It's an online process. You go online, you sign up, go to the Board of Elections website. I think there's also another website. I think I wrote it down, electiondayworker.com. You can go there also and get some instructions on how to become a poll worker. You're also paid for your service as a poll worker also. So that's a good thing. I would encourage for everybody that's, viewing or listening, anybody that's involved in a civic association, community board, NAACP, National Action Network, any of our civic groups, any of our community groups out there, we can find a whole lot of solicitation via those groups in our own communities to get our poll workers out there to help to build up the numbers. And yes, I'm still going to encourage our elderly, like my mother. I don't think I could keep her away anyway if I wanted to, but I'm going to encourage my mother and, and her friends as well to continue to be the poll workers that have that knowledge and that have that drive in their blood to continue to do that.
Thank you. And this question is, you mentioned earlier that this is the most important election of anybody, the entire world, right? And I want to specifically, this question is a long question, and I kind of want to touch on, it's going to be long because it has some facts in it that I want people to know or understand, and it's about immigrants. So a report by the Pew Research Center notes that more than 23 million naturalized immigrants in the United States are eligible to vote. That's about 1 in 10 eligible voters in the United States, a record high. Many of the administrations, that is Trump administration, proposed policy changes such as expanding the US-Mexico border wall and limiting legal immigration have generated strong polarized reactions from the public. These proposals may also affect how immigrants see their place in America and the potential role that they could play in the 2020 presidential election. Yet, being eligible to vote is one thing, but actually registering and showing up to the polls is a totally different thing. Historically, the voter turnout rates for immigrant-eligible voters has lagged behind US-born voters. In 2016, according to Pew, just about 54% of foreign-born eligible voters cast ballots, compared to 62% of US-born eligible voters. What are local governments doing to appeal to immigrant voters to register and go out to vote? And why does the immigrant vote matter in this election? That was a mouthful, I apologize.
Yeah, no problem. Let me jump in here. So I represent the 21st district in Brooklyn, which is part of Canarsie and part of Flatlands, but it's principally Flatbush, East Flatbush, Midwood, Ditmas Park, Windsor Terrace, and Park Slope. And so I functionally represent, the largest concentration of Caribbean immigrants outside of the Caribbean in the world, including the largest concentration of Haitian people outside of Haiti in the world. And so it's I think critical because you need people to vote up and down the ballot, right? It is important because so many, Adrian will tell you that, every single day we deal as government officials with literally every single thing that's going on, whether schools open or not, right? The responses of hospitals, right, during a pandemic, access to economic development money, P3 money that came through the government for small businesses, right? Like there's almost nothing that we don't deal with. As the chair of Energy and Telecom in the New York State Senate, I'm dealing with things like when we had the blackout and it was over 500,000 people who had power outages, some of them for weeks at a time, dealing with that and looking at the companies and utilities and trying to figure out what went wrong and how to fix that for the future. And so who you elect matters, right? Who you elect matters, and having the right people in office allows us to get things done. In the wake of the first part of the pandemic, we had civil unrest with with the Black Lives Matter protests, coming around. The state of New York was the first state legislature in the country to pass a comprehensive set of police reforms, right? Of the 10 bills that we passed, 4 of them were mine. And so if people don't come out and vote, then you don't get people who really represent you and are going to be prepared for the moments in which we need to pass legislation that fix some of the ills of our community. You don't have the people to ask the right questions to corporations who are not properly serving our community. You don't have the right people in place to hold other elected officials accountable for their behavior. And so it's critical no matter who you are, but particularly critical in immigrant communities that oftentimes are not getting the same kind of services and the same kind of attention that more American-born communities are getting. And so it's important for us all. And so, I encourage it in part by working with, civic associations, in the community, whether they're block associations, the community boards, groups like Sesame Flyers or the Caribbean Women's Health Association in my community, or even the local Brooklyn NAACP, which I'm very active with. And so, you work alongside them as well as sending out mailers. Earlier, I was, like I had sent this out recently, informing the people in my community that they can vote by mail. All right. And so part of it is that as an elected official, I feel like it's my obligation to inform my voters of what's going on in the community and making sure that they have access to the resources that are available to them. And again, the vote is the franchise. The franchise is the cornerstone of our democracy. And so we really have to make sure that as many people participate as possible.
Thank you. Congresswoman Adams, do you have anything?
There we go. Elevator.
Well, I'm still on the council, but I'm
gonna call Greg. I'm gonna call Greg and let him know.
She's a prophet.
Oh, sorry.
Or she's a prophet. You didn't know it.
Oh, goodness. Okay. I'm just going to throw in there, I echo everything that Senator Parker just said. For those of us that, are representatives of largely immigrant communities, it's really important also, and I'll just add this, I echo everything, and I'll just add this, that we have community partners and CBOs that are ingrained in the community that we partner with as well. I have a large Indo-Caribbean and South Asian population in my district, of which I absolutely adore. And we've been really blessed to work with some really great community partners, in the neighborhood to help us, to reach folks that may not necessarily want to be reached. We have a lot of, populations that don't want to come out for whatever. And this is pre-pandemic. I'm just talking about, that don't really want to be involved in the electoral process, or anything like that. So it's really important that we work with our community partners, those partners that can penetrate spaces a lot easier than we can. Sometimes there's a language barrier, and our partners can, speak the languages that we can't necessarily speak, and make those inroads and actually, speak up for us and be the faces, for us, for their elected officials. Because of the great partnerships that we share. So I'll just throw in that as well. And one more thing, it's really interesting to think about this. The senator mentioned representation in government that is so important, that that all of our residents, our population, see themselves in New York City government, and that's something that's sorely lacking. I had some of my South Asian constituents ask me, we need a South Asian caucus. Can't you start one? And I had to tell them, no, I can't. My parents are from South Carolina. I can't start a South Asian caucus, and I'm co-chair of the Black, Latino, and Asian caucus, but on, all of our areas where we work, there is representation. There is a Jewish caucus in the council. There you know, of course, my caucus. There is LGBTQ caucus. There is, there is an Asian caucus. You name it, and there is representation, but it's not enough. So we need, you know, for our immigrant population to become active, you know, if they can't figure it out how important it is, we're going to have to help them, you know, realize how important it is and how important representation of all of our communities and cultures are in New York.
Thank you very much. And I apologize if I speak very quickly. I'm just very, very excited about, you know, this conversation and the COVID-19, you know, conversations that we have. I just want to shift gears a little to talk some more about, like, to just talk about the census. I know that not everybody in New York has already filled out the census. So how can we appeal to more people to go out to fill out the census? And also, why is it important to fill out the census?
I'll start. I'm sure that you know, the leader will have you know, also a lot to say about this. The census is actually critical, right? It's 10 questions. It takes about 10 minutes to do, but the impact lasts 10 years. And it has an impact on hundreds of millions of dollars in discretionary funds for our communities. It has an impact on the location of schools, of community centers, of programs like free lunch programs. And it also impacts our representation from the perspective of redistricting and how lines are drawn. And so people really, really should get involved in the census. People should reach out to the people in their community and get involved. If you have not filled out the census and you're listening to this, please go to www.my2020census.gov. Again, that's www.my2020census.gov. Or you can do it on the phone at 844-330-2020. Again, it's 844-330-2020, and do it by phone. But filling out the census is really important. People should remember that the census is a lockbox. Individual data goes in, but only aggregate data goes out. And so that if I fill out the census, they can't get information about me and what I say about my household, but they can get information about my block, about Brooklyn, about New York City, about New York State, right? But it's critical that we do this. And the information can't go to the president, to ICE, to Homeland Security, to the FBI, to the NYPD. None of them can get access to the individual data. They can get aggregate data about the block or whatever, but nothing about individuals. And it's really a snapshot in time. And so people should think about who was in their home on April 1st, and whoever was in that home should be counted. It doesn't matter what their relationship is to you. It doesn't matter if they're immigrants or citizens. This is counting population, not citizens. And so everybody should, again, get up, be counted, and fill out your census today.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. You know, it's just amazing. The information, the low prioritization, you know, of our citizens when it comes to census. And we've really been out there trying to get this information out for quite a while. For it to come upon us now and for us to still be so low in the city, just a little over 60%, I believe, in the city for census completion. We still have such a long way to go. And as the senator says, we have so much to lose if we don't get our numbers up. So I made a recommendation in another meeting that I was in last week when it came to census and voter registration. And it's to start pairing those two things together, where we start to just, you know, make it a part of our conversation. Census and voting, you know, voting education or voter registration. Just pair the two together and let's just make it a focal point. Where the census, you know, falls right now, there isn't that much time. And that's the problem. But we can still do our part. You know, for me, it's a 24/7 chat. So wherever we are in our daily walk, you know, be it, you know, whether we're in our quarantine spaces or out there in our workspaces, however we're doing it, we have to make the census a part of our daily chat. Texting, we do text-a-thons, you know, pick 10 people. Did you fill out your census today? the next day, pick 10 more, ask those 10 to send it to 10 of their people in their address books. Those are some of the ways that we are going to propel the census talk between now and the 30th of September. We've got to get more active, and it's got to really, really penetrate, what this means. Part of the problem has been census education. People don't really realize that this is a personal thing. So folks aren't taking the census personally, and realizing the effect that they have, that the census or a lack of participation has on themselves and their homes. So that was a part of the education that I don't think was done very well. When it came to census education, it's been this push. It's been, Cardi B. It's been other people out there saying, mi gente presente. But I mean, what does that mean? Too, what does that mean exactly, and why? Why should I do this? That back conversation is something that was not done very well. So, and now we're behind the 8 ball. But we got to make it happen. There's still an opportunity. So I encourage everybody, text 10 people tomorrow and have them text 10 more and keep that flow going. Tell them that the census must be filled out. There's just no compromise.
Okay, thank you very much for this. I think there is a question in the chat. Dr. Myers, would you like to go ahead?
So we have a comment from someone in the chat who said, critical distinction, population, not citizens. I was wondering if maybe one of you, City Councilman Adams or State Senator Parker, would like to comment on that particular comment.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was just mentioning, that the census, first of all, census is, the United States government has to do the census by constitutional fiat, right? So this is a constitutional obligation that we have to count the population of the country every 10 years. And the population is exactly that, the population. Whether you're a citizen or not, you're still part of the population. And so, and that's part of why, and the same kind of things that we hear, it's interesting to hear Adrian talk about the notion of discussing census and voter registration, because they've actually been treated the same way. In the same that we began this conversation around voter suppression, we have also seen census suppression, which is something we had never seen that in this country before. But and the actual president being engaged in census suppression by trying to submit a citizenship question, and using ICE and other law enforcement agencies to try to throw a wet blanket on people's appetite to engage in the census is really outrageous. But you really want to get everybody counted. And we really have to fight through the fear mongering to give people the truth and make sure people understand the facts over fiction, and understand that they, regardless of their immigration status, should be counted. And that if they are counted, that they are not in any danger of being deported or detained or arrested because they participated in the census. And so that's critical information to get out, and we have to just continue to reach out to people. And so, I've been posting on my social media, I've been reaching out to friends, I've been working with some of my, elected officials in the community. We've been standing on street corners, by train stations, by bus stations, just, grabbing and dragging people and asking them to fill out the census. I've done several mailers to my constituents on it. And so we really have to pull out all the stops to make sure this happens. And let me just put a fine point on this as I close. And Adrian, I bet you don't even know this. Did you know I got elected because of the census? That in 2000, I actually was working for the state controller for Carl McCall, and he actually sent me to go work on the statewide census task force. So I wound up doing a lot of stuff in my district. And then in 2000, I ran for the city council. Didn't go the way I wanted it, so they sent Adrian to the city council. And then 2001, though, they did redistricting. And because of the redistricting based on the 2000 census, the New York State Senate went from 61 members to 62 members. That 62nd seat got drawn in my community. And I ran for that seat and won. And so I'm the only person to represent this 21st senatorial district in this particular configuration since it's been created 18 years ago. And so, so this has been very, again, as you heard Adrian talk about it, as a personal journey. And it's been a personal journey for me, because this is the way I got my seat and got my opportunity and the honor to serve my community. was by the census creating the seat and me was having the opportunity to fill it. But understand this, the census created the seat, but the census could also take the seat away if in fact it looks like the population is dwindling in those communities. So we're actually in danger right now. We don't get our numbers up of losing 2 congressional seats in the state, which means that those seats will go to other places. And that means places like Florida or Texas or Georgia is going to have more representation in New York. And that means we lose money. That means that we don't have the same kind of oomph and when it goes to making decisions and making and getting a push to get resources to come to our state. And so we really have to understand that this has an impact on our entire state, on our, but more importantly, on our community, on our blocks, on our schools, on our health facilities, on our housing. And so I want to really, again, just encourage everybody to stand up and get counted.
Senator, that's great to know. That trivia is great to know. I had no idea. So you've given me something else to put in my arsenal. I've got Senator Kevin Parker trivia to throw out there as well, and the benefit
You're welcome.
of having your leadership. So thank you for that. What a story.
Mm-hmm. We do have a comment in the chat about census suppression. I will let Dr. Myers take over now.
So one of our viewers said that census suppression is real. I completed my census data in March and received a receipt. Recently, a census worker came to my door to gather information because she said my house was not showing up as responding. The word has to get out not to ignore notices and census takers during the next few weeks.
That's right. I had the same thing. In fact, I filled mine out like the first week, and I've had census workers come to my house as well. And so, we just you have to be vigilant, and because it's just really that important and that critical that we make sure each person is counted.
I agree. I had the same issue, and this census worker came back twice. Actually, she came sometime last week, and she came this week, and it was just like, I told you last week that I already completed the census. I don't know what's going on. So we are now at like 8:51, and we will be closing promptly at 9. But I just have 2 more questions. The first question is, I have heard many individuals in the New York area say that New York is a blue state, so they won't be voting. And because their vote won't matter or their vote won't count. What do you say to these people? So if a family member comes up and says that to me, what should I be telling this family member?
Well, your vote always counts. My opening statement was that we never miss an opportunity to vote, ever. As a matter of fact, if the advice that Trump was giving to vote again, if we were able to do that legally, especially as Black folk, we need to make sure it happens. But we never, ever miss an opportunity to vote. Red state, blue state, whatever state, because again, as the senator says, your vote is your voice, your vote is your representation. You don't have any right to complain about your circumstances if you have not participated in your civic duty to vote.
Mm-hmm. And let me just add on to that, is that when you talk about red state versus blue state, all you're talking about is really from a perspective of voting for president, right? That has less of meaning when you talk about being what we call down ballot, right? And so not only is the president and vice president up for election this year, but every congressional member is up. Every single congressional member in the country. So whoever, you want to make sure that you cast your vote for your congressional member. And there are a lot of competitive, especially here in the state of New York, there are a lot of competitive congressional seats, right? And so you want to make sure you vote. But then also you have state legislators who are up. Every state senator is up. Every state assembly member is up. I'm up for re-election this year. So, please come out and vote. I'm not going to tell you to vote for me, but okay. So, but people should come out and vote. And so, you have, competitive Senate races, competitive assembly races, which are, critically important. And so I actually argue, and I may be a little biased being a state rep, but I think that just state reps, have more impact on your day-to-day life than even the president. I mean, the president does a lot of very important things. Don't get me wrong. But we start talking about the issues that people, care about day to day: education, healthcare, housing, public protection, transportation. Those things are primarily done by the state government, right? And so if you're not paying attention to who your state senator is, who your state assembly person is, then you're not really paying attention to the things that you absolutely have to pay attention to. And actually, we have a special election happening in Queens. So if you folks are in Queens, you also voting for your Queensborough president this year. And so, these all seats that are critical in terms of providing resources and providing voice to the public policy preferences that you and your community have.
Yeah, and I'll just, throw in also, I'm up for reelection next year also.
Mhm.
My first term is going to be up. I will be running to retain my seat
Right.
second term because I'm not termed out. But more than half of the New York City Council is termed out. We're going to lose 37 seats next year.
Right.
So that is going to be such a historical moment in time where pretty much the entire New York City Council will be turning over to new members.
Mhm.
It's important that that everybody know those candidates, know what you're looking for as a representative, and know who is running to get your vote and represent you in your specific districts.
That's right. And then next year as well, like as you indicated, the state doesn't have term limits. The city does have term limits. And so next June, in June 2021, the mayor of the city of New York is up for reelection. So Mayor de Blasio can't run for reelection. And so you'll have people running for mayor. You have Jumaane Williams running again for public advocate. The city controller seat is actually open. They can't run again. And actually, I'm running for city controller. And so, that will be happening. And then, as you indicated, 37 seats, of the 51. So this is talking about significantly more than half of the members of the council are going to be vacated, and there'll be, candidates running for those open seats. So the whole New York City government is going to change over the next year. And so, regardless of what your party affiliation is, you need to make your voice known about who you want to represent you in the largest city in the world with literally the fourth largest budget in the country. Right? People don't know this, but Adrian's in charge of a budget that's larger than 48 states.
Wow.
So it's important.
Don't tell too many people that, Senator.
Okay.
My Twitter's been blowing up for 2 months. Don't tell too many people.
That's funny.
Okay, so before we close out, I would just like to review again. You could either be State Senator Parker or City Councilwoman Adams. What are the deadlines for voting one last time for our viewers?
Council member?
All right, let's review. Our deadlines for voting once again, for you to register, that would be October 9th. You have until October 9th to register for the November 3rd election. Let's see, if you're doing absentee ballots, no later than 7 days before the election, those ballots must be postmarked, or you can apply online, but it has to be received no later than 7 days before the election. So that would be October 27th. I've got another date for you. The date to request, the deadline to request a mail-in ballot is October 27th. You have to, and once again, with all of these dates in mind, I'm going to encourage everybody, if you haven't, visit the Board of Elections website. All of this information is right there. Everybody that has a computer, you can also Google any question about voting, any questions about deadlines, any questions about ballots, how it's done, the procedures, what you need to do, and even there's some place to go if you don't know where to vote. You can certainly plug in your address and information will be given to you as far as where your polling location is. Again, I'm gonna stress early voting. My favorite thing to do in life. It starts on October 24th and it goes for about a week. So I'm going to encourage you, check that out also in your areas where you can go to early vote, mask up, glove up, safe space, social distance up, and get out and vote.
Yes, and early voting ends November 1st. So if you don't
November
pick
1st.
the 1st, you have to wait until November 3rd, which is election day.
Yeah,
Don't
right.
let anyone hoodwink you and think that you have a special election on the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, because
That's
that's
right.
happened in previous elections. So it's all the dates that City Councilwoman Adams just mentioned. And again, you can always look at your local Board of Elections for details if you still have any further questions. I would like to thank both of you, City Councilwoman Adrienne Adams, also my soror, and State Senator Kevin Parker. I wish you luck as you finish up your terms, and we appreciate all that you've done for the city. This is not about blue, it's not about red, this is about people getting out to vote. Black folks, we did not have the ability to vote for a very long time. Black men were just able to vote at the end of the 1800s. Black women were not able to vote until the last century. So it's important that we exercise our ability to vote. We make up roughly 12% of the American population. So our vote is something that others cannot take for granted. So we encourage each and every one of you to go out and vote. It doesn't matter if you're Democrat, Republican, Independent, Green Party. The point is you need to exercise your liberty to vote. And if you have questions, please consult your local Board of Elections, because we need everyone to get out and vote. And remember, tomorrow is Black Voter Day. So if you haven't registered, there's a large campaign by the Urban League and BET to encourage more of our people to get out and vote. We look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks, where we'll do our next COVID conversations, and we will be addressing the topic of cancer. October is breast cancer as well as prostate cancer month. And also we need to address colon cancer in our community. As we all know, we just recently lost Chadwick Boseman to stage 4 colon cancer. So we need to have a candid conversation about cancer screening. A lot of Black folks don't realize that for those of us who are Black, we should start our colon cancer screening at the age of 45, not 50. So we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks. Thank you for logging on. And thanks again to Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Tau Omega Chapter for co-sponsorship. Councilwoman Ann Adams or State Senator Parker, do you have any last words as we close out?
Just a big, go ahead, Senator.
Go ahead, Councilman.
No, I was just going to say thank you again for this invitation. What a great opportunity to be here with you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to my sorors of Tau Omega for your leadership and these wonderful informative sessions. I'm just very, very happy to be here and hope that I would be invited back for another session. I am here at your disposal. Now that we've got this one done, I think that we can do many, many more. Senator Parker, again, a pleasure to be with you, sir. Always a pleasure to be in your company and to just gain from your leadership. So thank you.
Yes, Councilmember, no, the pleasure is all mine. Good to hear from you. Good to share the stage with you. I'm just trying to figure out where that sister lives at. Make sure she don't live in my district, so because she sounds like she's ready to run for something. But this has really been my pleasure, and looking forward to more conversations about all the important things that affect our community. Everybody, God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night,
Good night.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Good night.